New developments this morning in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Law enforcement says they are looking into new evidence near her home in Tucson, Arizona. Authorities say they are looking into a damaged utility box near the home. Investigators say the equipment could be connected to a reported internet outage in the area around the time she vanished. The outage may have disrupted nearby surveillance systems, potentially affecting video evidence that could have helped track down the suspect. Authorities say they are close to a breakthrough, but much of the evidence remains confidential. Nancy Guthrie was reported missing more than a month ago. The family is offering a $1 million reward for information leading to her recovery.
Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that someone you love has simply vanished. No goodbye, no phone call, no explanation, just an empty home and a trail of questions. That is the terrifying reality surrounding the disappearance of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie, a woman who vanished from her home in the quiet Catalina Foothills of Tucson, Arizona. What began as a missing persons report quickly turned into something far more disturbing. Because the more investigators looked into that night, the more things stopped making sense. Security cameras in the area captured something chilling. A masked individual moving near Nancy's home around the time she disappeared. Not a neighbor, not someone casually passing through the neighborhood, but a figure whose presence raised an immediate and haunting question. Was Nancy Guthrie taken? Investigators began combing through every detail they could find. Every camera, every piece of digital evidence, every possible lead. But as the days passed, and then the weeks, the public began to wonder something unsettling. Why had there been no major breakthroughs? And then recently, two developments added an entirely new layer to the mystery. First, investigators began looking into a damaged utility box near Nancy's neighborhood, one that may have caused an internet outage around the same time she disappeared. If that outage disrupted security cameras or surveillance systems in the area, it raises a chilling possibility. Was someone trying to make sure they wouldn't be seen? Then came another revelation from journalist Brian Enton, who has been closely following the case. According to Enton, despite the lack of public updates, investigators may still be working aggressively behind the scenes. In many investigations, silence from law enforcement doesn't mean the case has stalled. Sometimes, it means they are quietly building something. And if that's true here, it could mean detectives already know more than they're telling the public. So tonight, we're going to walk through the timeline of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the disturbing clues that investigators have uncovered so far, and the two developments that are now raising new questions about what really happened that night. But before we dive deeper into this case, I want to pause for just a moment and say something to all of you watching. This channel, Real Case Records, exists because of people like you who care about the truth behind real stories. So, if you appreciate responsible true crime coverage that focuses on facts, investigation, and respect for victims and their families, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps these stories reach more people and keeps conversations like this going. And while you're here, I'd also love to know something. Where are you watching from today? Every time we cover a case like this, it's incredible to see people joining the conversation from all over the world. So take a moment and drop your city or country in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel and how many people are paying attention. Because the truth is, cases like Nancy Guthrie's don't just affect one family or one community. They remind all of us how fragile safety can be, even in places that feel quiet and secure. An 84-year-old woman disappearing from her own home is the kind of story that stops people in their tracks. And the presence of that masked figure on camera only deepens the mystery. Who was that person? Why were they there? And could the damaged utility box nearby suggest that someone carefully planned what happened that night? Those are the questions investigators are still trying to answer. But to understand why this case has captured so much attention, and why reporters now believe it may be far from over, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to the night Nancy Guthrie was last seen. Because sometimes, the smallest details from the very start of an investigation end up becoming the key to everything. When investigators began piecing together the timeline of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, something about that night immediately felt wrong. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She lived in the Catalina Foothills area of Tucson, Arizona, a place many people describe as quiet, peaceful, and removed from the kind of danger that usually makes headlines. It was the kind of neighborhood where most nights pass without incident. The streets are calm, neighbors recognize one another, and the idea of someone vanishing without a trace feels almost impossible. But sometime during the night, Nancy Guthrie disappeared. What makes this case so deeply unsettling is where it happened. Nancy didn't disappear while traveling or walking through a crowded public space. She vanished from the place where people expect to feel safest, her own home. When family members realized something was wrong, the concern quickly grew into alarm. Calls went unanswered, messages weren't returned. And when people began looking more closely at the situation, several details immediately stood out. Nancy's personal belongings were still inside the house. Her phone had been left behind. Nothing inside the home suggested that she had planned to leave or go anywhere that night. For investigators, those details matter. In many missing person cases, the smallest clues help determine whether someone left voluntarily or whether something more troubling may have happened. And in Nancy's case, the circumstances raised serious concerns almost immediately. Then came a discovery that changed the tone of the investigation entirely. Security footage from the area reportedly captured a masked individual near Nancy Guthrie's home around the time she disappeared. Not a neighbor walking past, not someone casually moving through the neighborhood, but a person whose face appeared deliberately concealed. The moment investigators reviewed that footage, the situation took on a much darker possibility. Because suddenly, this was no longer just about a missing person. It became about the possibility that someone had been near the home of an elderly woman in the middle of the night, for reasons no one could yet explain. And naturally, the questions began to multiply. Who was that person? Why were they near Nancy's home? And could they somehow be connected to her disappearance? Law enforcement quickly began an extensive investigation. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, speaking with residents and checking nearby surveillance cameras. Detectives began working to reconstruct every detail of the timeline surrounding the night Nancy vanished. Before long, the FBI joined the investigation, bringing additional resources and expertise to the case. When federal investigators become involved, it often signals that authorities believe the situation may involve serious criminal activity. Search efforts intensified. Evidence was collected and carefully analyzed. Tips from the public began pouring in as the story spread across the country. But even as investigators pushed forward, another discovery emerged that added a completely new layer of mystery. Not far from Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood, authorities began examining a damaged utility box. At first glance, that might sound like a minor technical issue. Utility boxes can be damaged by accidents, weather, or equipment problems. But what caught investigators' attention was the timing, because the damage may have caused an internet outage in the area around the same time Nancy disappeared. In today's world, many homes rely heavily on internet-connected technology. Doorbell cameras, security systems, and other surveillance devices often depend on a stable internet connection to record activity and store footage. If that connection is interrupted, those systems can stop working properly or fail to capture critical moments. So investigators began asking a question that quickly caught the attention of people following the case. Was the damaged utility box simply a coincidence? Or could someone have interfered with the infrastructure intentionally? At this stage, authorities have not publicly confirmed that the damage was deliberate. Investigators must approach possibilities like this carefully, because jumping to conclusions without clear evidence can easily mislead the public. But the timing alone has been enough to raise serious curiosity. If someone had planned to commit a crime in that area, disrupting internet connectivity could potentially limit surveillance coverage and reduce the chances of being recorded on nearby security cameras. Again, that does not mean that is what happened here. But it is one of the many details investigators continue to examine as they work to understand exactly what unfolded that night. Cases like this rarely move as quickly as people hope. Detectives often spend weeks, sometimes months, reviewing surveillance footage, analyzing forensic evidence, following tips, and reconstructing events minute by minute. From the outside, it can sometimes appear as though nothing is happening. News updates become less frequent. Public attention begins to shift elsewhere, and people start wondering whether the investigation has slowed down. But according to journalists closely following the case, that silence may not mean what many people assume. Reporter Brian Enton recently discussed how investigations like this often become quieter publicly, while detectives continue working behind the scenes. In many cases, law enforcement deliberately limits what they reveal, because releasing too much information could compromise the investigation. Certain details might alert a suspect. Other information could influence witness testimony. And in some situations, revealing evidence too early could even weaken a future prosecution. So while the public may only see small pieces of information at a time, investigators may still be actively working through leads that have not yet been shared. When you look at everything surrounding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the masked figure seen near her home, the damaged utility box that may have disrupted internet service, and the unanswered questions that remain, it becomes clear why this case continues to capture so much attention. Because somewhere within those details, the truth about what happened that night is still waiting to be uncovered. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this. Do you believe the damaged utility box was simply a coincidence? Or could it suggest that whoever was responsible for Nancy's disappearance may have planned this more carefully than anyone first realized? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you're someone who follows real investigations and wants to stay informed as new developments emerge, make sure you're subscribed to Real Case Records and have notifications turned on. Because stories like this remind us how important it is to keep attention on cases where families are still waiting for answers.